Our next guest comes to us live from Detroit at the National Summit. That's a forum to improve America's competitiveness in the global economy. He says it could take a century for the U.S. to replace fossil fuels with alternative energy sources. He's the CEO of the nation's third largest oil company. Jim Mulva joins our Betty Lou in Detroit. Betty?
Hi, thanks so much, Pim. That's right. We're here with Jim Mulva. He's the chairman and CEO of ConocoPhillips, and spoke earlier this morning, or earlier today, I should say, Jim, about carbon legislation and about energy and how we're going to make that more efficient in the United States. And thanks so much for being with us. Obviously, you know, the first thing I want to start off with you is on the price of oil and what we've seen so far. How much do you think the increase we've seen in the oil price over the last few months, how much is that on a fundamental basis, and how much do you think that has to do with speculation?
Well, I can't really comment with respect to speculation, but I think we are seeing indications, not only in the United States but around the world, that there's some stability starting to take place in the economies with the expectation of some slow recovery, and the expectation of that leads to increased demand. And as a result of increased demand for oil, it's showing up in oil prices. Oil prices, when they were $147 a year ago, were too high. They were too low at $30 and $40 earlier this year. So I think $70 oil price is a good balance with respect to promoting investment by the industry to add production. And it's a reasonable price with respect to the consumer. And
so that is what you're basing your business on, then? It's about $70 oil at this moment?
Yes, long term, we look at $70 to $80 oil price. We think that would be a good price for the balance of consumers and investment. And we spend and invest for the long term, so we have to look through the cycles. When we have experienced a downturn in the economy or a strong economy, we invest for the long term.
Okay. What about in terms of the rise we've seen in the oil price, and then also the decline in the natural gas price? I mean, is that divergence, you think, going to continue, or are we going to see a convergence?
Well, there's been more divergence, obviously, with the oil price and natural gas price. Oil price is really a worldwide market. In the case of natural gas, it can become more regional. In the case of the United States, the industrial demand is off, and we've seen quite a bit of added supply by unconventional natural gas.
Okay.
And so natural gas is more of a regional market compared to oil. But I think with time, natural gas is such a clean, superior fuel that I think we'll see that convergence start to come back some.
Okay. Jim, hang on. Thanks so much for joining us. Jim Mulva, chairman and CEO of ConocoPhillips, live here from the National Summit. Keep it here.
This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Pim Fox. Now let's head to Detroit. Bloomberg's Betty Lou is standing by again with ConocoPhillips CEO Jim Mulva. Betty?
That's right, Pim. We're continuing our conversation with Jim Mulva, chairman and CEO of ConocoPhillips, as you just mentioned. And Jim, earlier we were talking about oil and gas prices, but I want to ask you something that's obviously going to be affecting the trade on that, which is the cap and trade legislation that is being debated right now in Washington. I mean, what is your view on that? Do you support this or not? Because I've heard a lot of criticism during this conference about that.
Well, cap and trade is one approach. Carbon tax is another approach to address the cost of carbon and addressing CO2 emissions in our country as well as in the world. So two different approaches. What's really important is to establish a price for carbon, hopefully do it in a way that's very transparent. We don't create winners and losers, and we do it in a way that minimizes its impact on the growth and development of our economy. Now, if we look at the Waxman-Markey proposed legislation, we see that it has created, in our opinion, winners and losers. And with respect to the oil and gas industry, we feel that there's things that need to be changed or corrected for it to be a more fair bill with respect to our industry.
Like what, for example?
Well, with respect to the credits that may be available. It seems that for natural gas, which is a very superior clean-burning fuel, there's essentially no credits associated with it with respect to power generation as compared to coal. Transportation fuels, gasoline and diesel, there's no credits that essentially that are available ultimately. So if enacted as legislation, there'll be an immediate increase in the cost to the consumer for gasoline and for diesel.
Yeah, we've heard a lot about the immediate pass-through cost to the consumer. But do you think, given that this legislation has any chance of surviving in Washington?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I know what's being developed ultimately would have to be passed by the House, and then ultimately what does the Senate pass, and then go to conference. So I think it's a start.
Okay. Jim, in the time that we have, I want to ask you about your refineries, because we've seen a turnaround thus far in the last few months in the gas price. Are you running your refineries harder in reaction to that, to sort of catch up to that, or no?
Not really. In the first 4 months of this year, we did more scheduled maintenance in our refineries than we've had in the history of the company. So we had them down for maintenance, but it's just recently that all of our refineries in the United States are really back up and running essentially at capacity. We've seen gasoline prices improve quite a bit, but not distillate prices.
Yeah.
And so even though the crack spreads, refining margins look good, the realized margins aren't as good.
Okay.
And but we're running quite well.
Okay, so you don't plan on increasing that at this point then?
We're running at capacity.
At capacity,
and we need to do that because we don't know what the weather will bring with respect to the hurricane season.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate you spending some time with us at this national summit. Jim Mulva, Chairman and CEO of ConocoPhillips. Back to you, Pim.